is from Edinburgh in Scotland. I would love to have been with you today, but COVID does not allow for such travel at the moment. I would like to begin by thanking the organising committee for inviting me to speak here today on the theme of intangible cultural heritage and why we should care about it. I begin with a picture of a chair in our home. As you can see, it is not a new chair. It is not necessarily a fashionable chair, but it is a very precious possession. And the reason this chair is precious is because it was handcrafted by my father-in-law. And it is that skill of crafting that I would like to focus on today. With the English language, we have just one word for heritage. And for many people, that one word refers to tangible items. They think of castles, country manor homes, buildings, monuments, and perhaps museums. But in Irish Gaelic, we have two words for heritage. We have Aireacht and we have Dúchas. Aireacht is heritage coming down from above. And Aireacht is often what people think about at heritage, the big castles, the big homes. Dúchas is heritage coming up from below. And Dúchas is intangible heritage, or living heritage, or as I tend to call it, people's heritage. There is a UNESCO definition for the phrase intangible cultural heritage. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Here it reads, the intangible cultural heritage means the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and importantly, cultural spaces associated therewith. And very important is the last part, that communities, groups, and in some cases individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. So the process of recognition by communities is integral to the definition of intangible cultural heritage. UNESCO divides intangible cultural heritage into 5 domains. The first domain is oral traditions and expressions, including language as a vehicle of the intangible cultural heritage. The second domain is performing arts. It includes things like theatre, music, festivals, etc. The third domain is social practices, rituals, and festive events. And of course, there is an overlap between all of these domains. The fourth domain, I think, is very important in contemporary times, with COP26 having happened recently in Glasgow, but also an increasing awareness of the importance of the environment and climate change. So the fourth intangible cultural heritage domain is knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe. The final domain, and it's one that is sometimes neglected, is traditional craftsmanship. And it's on the issue of craftsmanship and why should we prepare that I would like to focus on in this presentation. So what do we mean by craft? Here is a definition taken from Craft and Sustainable Development and Investigation, which says, craft is usually taken to mean an object which has a high degree of handmade input, but which is not necessarily made or designed using traditional materials. craft is usually produced as a one-off or as part of a small batch, the design of which may or may not be culturally embedded in the country of production. Craft is also sold for profit, and craft enterprises are those involved in the production of crafts on a part-time or full-time basis. Now, this is a very general definition of craft, and it's not particularly the kind of craft that we mean when we talk about the intangible cultural heritage. Instead, we are really focusing on a heritage craft. So what do we mean by a heritage craft? And a heritage craft is one that uses manual dexterity and skills, uses traditional materials, designs, and techniques. And according to the Heritage Crafts Association in the UK, which has been practiced for at least 2 generations. So this is much more the kind of craft that UNESCO means when it's talking about intangible cultural heritage, something that is particular to a place, handed down from one generation to the next, and very often has issues of identity tied up with it. Now, traditional craftsmanship and intangible cultural heritage has been identified by UNESCO as important. And they also point out that traditional craftsmanship usually has a product. It could be a drink, it could be a piece of material, it could be a tapestry, it could be a musical instrument. And it points out that traditional craftsmanship is perhaps the most tangible manifestation of intangible cultural heritage. But when UNESCO is talking about traditional craftsmanship, it's not really the output or the product they are interested in. It's the skills that go into making that product and the skills that go into preserving that tradition and the knowledge that is passed down from one generation to the next. Let's look at some examples of intangible cultural heritage crafts globally. For most people, when they think of Switzerland and France, they will think of mechanical watchmaking. Where is the crafting of the finger-plucking traditional musical instruments in Malawi and Zimbabwe? Placemaking is a craft that is passed down from one generation to the next, as is boat building. Traditional brass and copper craft of utensil making is considered an important example of intangible cultural heritage. And traditional Chinese design and practices for building Chinese wooden arches is yet another example. When you ask people, why is intangible cultural heritage important? They will usually come up with 1 or 2 reasons, such as identity, continuity, and tourism. And they are all true. But what I would like to focus on in the next part of this presentation is a much more broad perspective on why intangible cultural heritage is so vital to our society. And here I am drawing on material that is presented by communities themselves to UNESCO when they are making the case for a particular skill or craft that has been handed down from one generation to the next. And I'd like to begin with the example of craftsmanship of mechanical watchmaking and art mechanics in Switzerland and France. Now, of course, watches have an economic function, And there is no doubt that many of the crafts we are dealing with have an economic function, which is very important and we cannot ignore. But as well as serving as an economic function, the practice of good craftsmanship involves other skills, transferable skills, like punctuality, perseverance, creativity, dexterity, and patience. And in the case of these watches, the infinite quest for precision and the intangible aspect of time measurement also makes people philosophize about life. So the example of watches is not just about identity, and it's not just about economics. It is also about good, transferable skills that are vital to every part of society. And now I'd like to look at an example from Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's an example of a specific technique of embroidery that is used by some women in the villages. And this embroidery is used to decorate costumes and household items. For example, a wedding dress, some scarves, bed linen, garments. And the main characteristic of this embroidery is this deep blue colour that you can see in this embroidered piece here. And this deep blue colour is handmade with the vegetable dyes. And it is used to embroider improvised geometrical shapes. And the richness and variations of the designs determine the social status of women in the village. Embroidery is usually performed in groups, so it's a community skill. And the women engage in singing and chatting while they're doing their needlework. The knowledge is transmitted orally, although sometimes in formal educational environments. And students learn by watching experienced embroiderers who combine predetermined elements into numerous variations. And this embroidery captures respect for diversity, for creativity, and for non-verbal communication. And as you can expect, it has a strong sentimental and emotional value, and that particularly applies to displaced populations who can wear their designs with pride as a marker of identity. In Colombia, there is a specific strategy of traditional crafts for peace building that I think have an incredible importance for us. And that is a safeguarding strategy which aims to train different sectors of the population, create labour connections, and foster cultural entrepreneurship. So basically what they do is they establish a link between bearers of traditional crafts and skills who are recognized for their communities, and then they link those with apprentices, usually aged between 14 and 35, who will become peace builders in the future by learning a skill or a craft and seeking to transform their situation of vulnerability into one of employment. So the safeguarding strategy is aimed at encouraging young people to get a qualification in a traditional craft, thereby improving their employment opportunity, and running workshops and work skills programs for other people. And priority is given to young people who have been exposed to the effects of armed conflict, or who have left school early, or who have had very little employment opportunity. So I think we can clearly recognise the cultural and societal value of safeguarding different traditional skills and crafts in this context. And I'd like to point to a musical example of the finger-plucking musical instrument in Malawi and Zimbabwe. And it's really the songs that have the additional benefit in this traditional craft, in that the songs contain important messages, with some guarding children against bad behaviour, and other songs condemn negative behaviours in the community. The music is also used to communicate information about events, contemporary and past. And symbolically, whenever and wherever it is played, this instrument acts as a weapon for condemning violence and other societal ills. My next example is the art of dry stone walling knowledge and techniques. And this art of dry stone walling concerns the know-how related for making stone constructions by stacking stones upon each other without using any other material except sometimes dry soil. And these are very often used in rural areas and in steep terrains as well, both inside and outside inhabited spaces. Now, these structures testify to the methods and practices used by people from prehistory. So one can see that there is a long heritage and tradition going with this skill. Now, apart from the important issues of identity and continuity, this particular example of intangible cultural heritage is very important in environmental terms, because these structures can play a vital role in preventing landslides, floods, and avalanches. They can combat erosion of the soil. They can combat desertification of the land, thereby enhancing biodiversity and creating adequate microclimatic conditions for agriculture. So you can imagine that the roots of this go back very far, and this particular skill is made in harmony with the environment. And we saw earlier on another skill, which was game playing between horses and human beings, that this developing of a relationship between human beings and nature is extremely important. Most of us, when we think of the Netherlands, we think of windmills and perhaps tulips. And I think there is no need to say too much about this, except to say that in the Netherlands, the miller's craft has a very iconic role. It has an extremely important social and cultural role, and brings a very strong sense of identity and continuity. My next example is from Madagascar, and here I am talking about wood crafting knowledge. So we're talking about foresters, carpenters, and craft workers who have developed a body of practical knowledge and skills revolving around wood. And again, we know already that it's important for identity, and most craft skills are important for the economy. But this one also has the added value of bearing witness to the central role of this material in all aspects of life and death. Practically all wooden structures here, walls, window frames, posts, beams, stools, chests, tools, would have very elaborate ornamentation. There are many different types of trees and species of trees used, and the decoration on the wood will reflect the nature of the tree. Houses and tombs are assembled entirely with traditional mortise and tenon joints without the use of nails, hinges, or other metal hardware. And that is a skill that is increasingly lost in the Western world. The parchments are highly codified, and they reflect the community's origins. And no two pieces are identical. This is something, of course, we can say about a lot of crafts, that even if they look the same, unlike machine-made workmanship, no two products are exactly the same. And the ornamentation and the coding inherent in the ornamentation informs about roles and the social standing within the community. The final example I thought was appropriate to talk about this afternoon is beer culture in Belgium. And making beer is part of the living heritage of a range of communities throughout Belgium. And it plays a role in daily life as well as on festive occasions. Now, Belgium is very proud of its beer heritage, and almost 1,500 types of beer are produced in the country using different fermentation methods. Since the 70s, craft beer has become especially popular, and I think the same can be said of Scotland today, where craft beer is becoming increasingly important. And there are certain regions which are known for particular varieties of beer. Some Trappist communities also have been involved in beer production, and they give their profits to charity. So here is a skill where the economic output is diverted to charity. But of course, beer isn't just about beer. Beer is used for cooking, including in the creation of products like beer-washed cheese. Or in the case of wine, beer can be paired with food to complement flavors. And several organizations work with communities to promote responsible beer consumption and a sustainable practice. Again, we're back to the issue of the environment and intangible cultural heritage. Sustainable practice has become part of the beer culture, with recyclable packaging encouraged and new technologies being availed of to reduce water usage in production processes. Besides being transmitted in the home and in local social circles, knowledge and skills regarding beer are also passed down by master brewers who run classes in breweries. There are specialized university courses that target those in the field of hospitality in general, and public training programs for entrepreneurs and small test breweries for amateur brewers. That we have looked at specific examples and what benefits they in particular bring to local communities and wider national and international communities. Let's go back to the general reasons why people think we should care about intangible cultural heritage, and in particular about arts and crafts. For thousands of years, humans have created different forms of arts and crafts, and they have become an integral part of our culture and society. And for many people, the crafts that we engage with reflect our identity at an individual and a societal level. And that means actually that if you want to get to know more about people, get to know more about their crafts. Arts and crafts are also a vital form of communication. We live in a world where countries have different languages and different dialects. And arts and crafts are a way of communicating with people, even if we do not understand the words. They can speak to us. They can evoke emotions, thoughts, of ideas. And of course, the success of many economies depends on tourism, and tourism depends on an infrastructure which can support thousands of jobs. So identity, communication, and tourism are the top reasons why we should value intangible cultural heritage. There are also other benefits which we could organize differently. And we could talk about physical benefits, social benefits, and cognitive benefits. And the physical benefits, I think, are obvious to most of us, about developing our motor skills. Most arts and craft activities consist in moving fingers and hands. Simple actions like using a paintbrush or coloring, they strengthen our muscles, improve our control, enhance our dexterity, something that's actually very important for children. Hand-eye coordination is also an important physical benefit of many of these craft techniques. But there are also social benefits, because people engaged in these kind of activities are usually pretty good at reflecting critically on their own work and on the work of others. They learn how to work intelligently and creatively, but they also learn about working in community, because most of the intangible cultural heritage examples that we have looked at today are done in collaboration with others rather than done on their own. I think creativity is a cognitive benefit, and also decision making. You have to decide when to begin, when to end a process. Timing can be very essential to some intangible cultural heritage processes. Memory and visual learning are also extremely important. I could go on forever about the benefits of intangible cultural heritage, but I think there are two more that deserve mention before I conclude. And the first is that intangible cultural heritage is often of particular benefit to rural places. It can give a strong sense of belonging, and intangible cultural heritage, much of it is about locality, and many heritage crafts are based on local resources. And you will find that these local resources, although often at small scale level, when combined in activity with other events going on, they can make huge contributions both economically and socially to rural places. And the final benefit I'd like to talk about is the sustainability agenda, because emphasizing local communities and customs to people who appreciate the value of local resources is extremely important to the sustainability agenda. Many of the crafts people who engage in the kinds of activities we have mentioned here today are people who are in tune with the environment, who have regard for their communities, and who will not drain local resources, but instead will seek to replenish it in a sustainable way. So in terms of rural communities, sustainability, tourism, the economy, identity, physical, social, and cognitive benefits, there are many, many reasons why we should care about intangible cultural heritage. Gurb Mahogwith, and I will say thank you in my own native Irish language. Gurb Mahogwith, thank you.
That was wonderful. It really made me think about it while I was listening to Professor Mairead lecture. I think these local assets around the world probably exist for their own benefits, pride. I think prior to our era, I think in our era, we definitely have advent of communication, and we hear and we know about this very quickly, and a lot of people can share this very quickly. And I feel this is something that we should share. I think it's really the greatest benefit of our time is that we can learn about each other's culture, and we can learn about and we can share what we can do with other people who live around the world.